Hey, it's Mike with Available Technology. We've got our workstation pretty much assembled. Now we're going to plug in power. And for most people this is the hardest part because there's lots of connectors and you got to know which ones to plug in where. But really there's only, each thing can only plug in one place. It's just a little bit daunting when you see this giant octopus of cables here. So we got our power supply mounted. Each of the components in the machine is going to have power, and then the hard drive and the DVD are going to have data that connect to them as well. So let's look at these connectors so you can know what the difference is between these. So these connectors are all from the power supply, and they're all different. Okay, so let's look at this first set. This first set is labeled PCIe. So this is extra power for PCI Express. We're not going to be using these for this video card because this one doesn't require additional power. So these I can really zip tie them, get them out of the way. I don't need them at this point. Okay, let's look at this next set. This second set is labeled CPU. So this is additional power for our processor, and almost every motherboard these days needs one of these connectors plugged in. So if we know that this goes to the motherboard and we look down at our motherboard, the connector for this is right here. There's the connector that's going to take this cable. So CPU, either one of these should work fine, and there's a little clip, usually on the outside edge, that will correspond with this clip here. So what I'm going to do is clip that right into that socket and get the line up right. There we go, and that one is in. I'm going to tuck this away and get it out of the way. Tuck it under the motherboard if you want to, zip tie it up just so it doesn't get in a fan or cause any trouble. But there's our CPU power connector. We also have this one sitting here from our fan. So there's the one from our fan that we just installed. I need to plug that in somewhere, so that's going to plug in right here, right next to the CPU itself. So if you look here, this one is labeled CPU. So we got two CPU fans we could use. I'm just going to plug into either one of these, the best one that I think it needs to be plugged into. And now we got that plugged in. We just want to make sure that our fan spins freely. We don't want any of these cables getting into that fan and keeping it from being able to cool our processor. So those two are done. Let's take a look at what else is on this power supply. So the power supply has this giant connector, and this is the main connector for the motherboard. So if we look at our motherboard, you'll be able to see exactly where this plugs in. There's the only place it can go, right there. Nice big wide power supply connector, and so that's what we're going to plug in. Sometimes these are two pieces. We're going to make sure that's connected correctly. See this little tab here will correspond with this tab on the outside, so I will turn it and plug it in on the outside. Just make sure that our holes are lined up correctly. Give it a little push. Snap. It's in. These we're going to push out of the way. When you're done building this machine, you're going to take some zip ties, which usually come with the computer, usually come with a few to get you started, and get these cleaned up and out of the way so they won't fall into anything or cause any issues. So there we go. We got our motherboard connected. There's one more connector down. Let's take a look at these. Now these are all power connectors, but there's two different kinds. So this is the old IDE type connector. This is just the standard 4-pin connector. And then the older devices use that. On this computer that we're building, the only thing that's going to use this are our lights and fans. So we've got these lights and fan connectors here. And you can see that they're a little bit bigger, and they're kind of that rectangular shape. So these are the ones we're going to use. So I got these two which need power. I'm going to plug those in there. In the right way. There's one set, and then I've got lots of other connectors. I've got this other fan and light that needs power, so I'm going to plug it in there as well. And again, they're beveled so you can only go one way. And once those are in, I'm going to tuck those out of the way. I'm going to use my zip ties and get those cleaned up later. Right now we're going to leave those where they sit. Then the other type of connector is these. These are the SATA power connectors. The serial ATA connectors. This is what will go to our DVD-ROM drive and our hard drive. So So I'll just take whichever one of these will reach, and we'll just find the connector on the back of the DVD-ROM. It's going to be a little hard to see. It's hard for me to see, and I'm here. Once you find it, just snap it right in. Again, make sure these are out of the way. We'll zip tie those later, keep them out of the way of the fans. That's very important. If your fans can't spin, then your CPU will overheat, and that will not be pleasant at all. Okay, we've got another set of these. I don't know that we're even going to need to use these because the last thing to plug in is this hard drive. Now, since this hard drive goes into the case and the connector's on the other side, I got to flip this over so we can see what we're doing. So there's our connector right there for our power. So we have to get one of our cords back there and power that thing up. Just want to see if this one will reach. Looks like it's a little bit short. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this other one. Pull that through. Again, this stuff I'll zip tie up later, but for the moment I'm just going to plug that into my power. And then once we get this plugged in, we're almost finished. Tuck those away, clean them up with our zip ties. So now the only thing we're lacking for this computer to be ready to turn on is a way for the hard drive and the DVD to connect to the motherboard. Because right now we have them connected to the power supply, but there's no way for our hard drive to connect to our motherboard. So to do that, we use data cables. And your motherboard will come with data cables. These are SATA data cables because we're using SATA drives. So I have one of these that will connect to the DVD and one of these that will connect to the hard drive. Let's do this DVD first because it's probably going to be a little bit easier. If we look at the back of the DVD-ROM drive, you see the SATA connector. It's a kind of an L shape. You got a straight part here and then a little turn down. If you look at our cable, if you can see that, it's got the same thing. So we just make sure that that little turn down matches this little turn down. And snap, that part's done. Now on the motherboard, we've got several pieces we could plug this in. And you'll see that right here are a couple of SATA connectors that we can use. So I'm going to take the other end of this cable. Again, it's going to have a little L, kind of a little turn down to an L shape. Same thing on our jack that we're plugging into. Just make sure they match. Snap, there we go. So now we have our DVD-ROM connected to the motherboard. Last thing to do would be the hard drive itself. So let's go ahead and flip this back around. Look at our cable, it's got the little turn up for our, like an L shape. Same thing on our data side, so we're just going to plug it in there. Snap. This part goes through because we're going to have to plug that into the motherboard. And once that's pulled through, flip it back over. And this one's going to plug into this other SATA connector. Now this one has an L connector on it, and I didn't notice that, but we can still use it. Plug it right in. And snap, that one's done. So at this point we have power supply plugged in, our add-on video card plugged in, CPU's installed, and the fan is on. Both the memory modules are plugged in. We got power here, fan's plugged in so it will turn. We've turned on our case fans and our lighting. Those are plugged in down here. We have data going from the DVD-ROM into the motherboard and from the hard drive into the motherboard, and we have power going to each of those. So right now, this thing will be ready to turn on. It'll be ready to turn on at this point and start installing an operating system. The last thing that we would have to do is to connect those couple of little connectors that we have down here. We've got the power connector, the power switch, the hard drive connector. So there's the one that's labeled power switch. The reason that you would plug that in is so when you put your power button up here, it actually will turn the computer on. That has to be connected to the motherboard as well. All motherboards are different. Typically though, they're going to be down in this little area here. The best thing for you to do is to check your motherboard manual and see where they go on your particular motherboard. So once you find that on the manual, then these are clearly labeled and you'll know where to plug them into these tiny little headers. That's the last part that you would need to do there. Once that is done, then you can plug the power from the wall into here, plug in your monitor to your add-on video card or your built-in, get your keyboard and mouse plugged into USB, and at that point you can fire this thing up and load your operating system. So the next thing you do is once you turn it on, open up your DVD-ROM drive, put in your disk. Like this is a Windows Server disk, but you can use 2008, 2012. You can use Windows 10, whatever you want. Load it in there, and we'll need to get it booting from this CD so we can do the installation. But that's the majority of what it takes to set the computer up and get it built. As you go through the operating system install, there's lots of prompts. You just answer those prompts and go through it, and you shouldn't have any trouble. And if you have any questions, you can always email us. We're info@available.